who were very kind to donate that stuff. And as soon as, I think this is a topic which, you know, as soon as you start talking about it, people kind of open their heart a little bit, because it's something which, even if you're not really involved in it, you kind of understand that it's a really serious human problem. And you're going to get a lot more of that from Anne, because she's really good on the statistics and really good on how it works. But I think one thing that's really important to say when we do any of these things and start talking about this stuff is just that it's not as remote as people always think it is. So human trafficking and slavery and enforced labour is something which most people, I would guess, typically are associating with particular countries, particular geographies, particular trade routes, particular industries as well, you know, particular sort of end goals, if you want to put it that way. But that's not really the case. In fact, there are more people being trafficked across borders in Western Europe now, and in countries which people are usually thinking of as being relatively safe, than there have ever been before. In terms of what happens when they get there, you're really looking at extreme levels of slavery. So enforced labour, people being put through working conditions that none of us can really ever imagine, and forced to do things which for the majority of us would be unthinkable. I think slavery really links very closely to human trafficking, and people are really aware and sort of think of slavery usually in this kind of 1600s, you know, shipping people off from some distant country, mostly travelling and bringing them towards the States, you know, this kind of plantation style slavery. But again, the same as human trafficking, there have never been more slaves on the planet than there are today. So you're dealing with, well, the most official research figures would suggest in the tens of millions, but there are figures out there which would suggest well up to around 100 million or more. And you're dealing with things, you know, you're not just dealing with sort of, let's say, old workhouse style labour, which is really intensive labour for little money. You are dealing with really heavy stuff. So you're dealing with people being forced into prostitution, for people being forced to cook, clean and work for somebody, and then shut in the cupboard at the end of the evening, and nobody knowing that this person lives there. You know, this is quite common even today, even in London. It happens in London every day. There are hundreds of houses with this kind of enslaved person living in the house, which most people don't even realise is living there. And usually they're locked back up in the cupboard before the guests come, so people, you know, think that the housewife has somehow managed to prepare a meal for 30, 40 people. And it's, it's not good, it's horrible. So we're working today with a partner from our company who are called Stop the Traffic, and they basically do something very similar to ourselves, which we'll see more about in a moment. But they go into companies and help you find your weaknesses, help you find out where there are potential weaknesses for human trafficking and slavery within your business model, and they do that on kind of an ad hoc basis. It's a bit similar to what we do, but it's not integrated, so to say. Okay. So, I mean, I've already introduced myself to everybody in the room. Everybody now knows who I am, and we'll do the same shortly. But our company, DX Solutions, is all about anti-money laundering software. And usually when people hear compliance, their first thought is definitely not human trafficking. Their first thought is a boring man in a suit with a clipboard, walking around, filling out an Excel table, telling you whether or not what you're doing is right. What people don't realise is that the compliance aspect of the entire thing has a very human element. This stuff is all relating to the anti-money laundering checks that were going on in Germany recently, and how there's a complete failure in the system. Basically, because of that failure, terrorist attacks were actually happening. There were real live terrorist attacks, people being put in trouble with guns and huge attacks, buses driving into public, because the anti-money laundering procedure, because the compliance procedure wasn't in place properly. What that kind of leads to, and the way that most of this money is being funded into terrorism, is illegally earned money. And that money, the huge majority of it, is being earned through weapons trafficking, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. Weapons are definitely not cheap, especially on the black market. Drugs are surprisingly cheap on the black market when you're buying them in bulk. But humans, well, humans are a lot more expensive than both of those things. Of course, when you compare that to a human life, you can never call it expensive because it's far too cheap for what it is. But the amounts of money that are changing hands are astronomical. And it's quite scary to see how that plays out and how you can do it. Now, usually when people think about 21 compliance, again, the majority of what they think, well, usually most people don't know what it is. They think about fraud. So they think your credit card is being stolen, they think somebody is trying to hack into your bank account, or they think, okay, somebody didn't pay their tax, how are they going to get his money? How is he going to clean that money through the system? What they don't realise is how all of these things are actually having a huge financial impact, and how you're really, in your bank and in your company and in your fintech and in any of the financial providers you work with, you are seeing money flows which are the exact profit from human trafficking. So they really are coming directly out of that. Before I tell you how you see it and what it is and the way that it works and what you've got to look for, probably just important again to reinforce what is actually happening. So some of the things that those people are going to. I actually really hate this graphic because I find this graphic makes it look quite fun. Like, I think this graphic is somehow a positive little picture that makes it look like a comic book, but when you read the words underneath it and realise what is happening, it's not fun at all. But usually with human trafficking, you're dealing either with a direct abduction, so somebody is quite literally taken from the streets as a child or an adult, put into a van, put into a bus, put into a ship, gone. Or what we're quite often seeing, and this may ring like a pulse for some of you if you've ever worked abroad or gone and taken sort of a teaching job abroad, is essentially a job application or a job description telling you that you can go and work abroad for a year, you'll get money, you'll get training, you'll have a wonderful life, they'll provide you with some housing, and then you'll have a year left on your visa. You can either come back or you can stay there and fend for yourself for a year. And so for anyone who has done something such as myself and gone and taught English abroad in the past, it's the same application process. You get a form, you fill it out, you don't meet the person, you're told you've got a job, you get on a plane and you go. For me, it worked out fine. But for approximately 20.9 million people, that didn't work out fine. Yeah? So that process of applying for jobs, thinking that they were getting on a bus, thinking that they were going to have a new life, a new job, get some experience behind them, potentially learn a new language in a foreign country, turned out to be the worst decision they've ever made. Usually, this process happens during part of the transfer process. So the lovely company says, guys, don't worry about getting the bus to the airport, don't worry about getting the bus from the airport, we'll meet you, our people will take care of you, you're part of the team now. Get into a bus, and that's pretty much the last thing you can ever expect to see. The things that happen beyond that then, as typical stuff, like I say, forced labour, we spoke about forced prostitution, but organ theft on the black market. So there is a huge, huge market that is beyond any of the unicorns that you're seeing in the startup world out there in its size for organs, for human organs, which you simply cannot get at the speed you need them. For people who have the resources and are incredibly sick, they will pay millions for a kidney or a liver that is compatible with their body. Quite literally millions. And that, of course, forces people who want to make money out of that into finding a way of doing it. Forced prostitution. Forced prostitution is a really interesting one. I wrote my graduate thesis on the rights of prostitutes and how they should be allowed to sell themselves, and how that should be a personal choice. I spent quite a lot of time going to fintech events and sport events in Amsterdam, and always as a young person thought how amazingly open the city was and how it was really kind of liberal and cool that there's people there. What people don't really talk about is the fact that, sure, there's theoretically a right to choose to have that occupation, but actually the majority of people you're seeing there aren't there by choice. Amsterdam is actually within Europe the top global offender or the top European offender for human trafficking as a destination, with the major offender as a sending country being Moldova. In Moldova, it's really, really easy. I cannot even explain how easy. I mean, you can quite literally walk into and I've seen it happen undercover with an undercover camera, walk into a park, ask somebody about how it's going to happen, ask them if they can connect you to somebody to provide you with a girl, and within about 2 connections, you've found somebody who will hook you up to someone. And then, of course, boats. I'm not going to get into any of the transport because we have a transport queen here today who's going to be able to talk to you about the way that works and the dangers of that. I'm going to talk to you about your bank account. One thing that I think often gets forgotten today, especially in our kind of new bustling fintech world of Bitcoin and of cryptocurrencies, of high volume transfers going between countries, is the idea that cash is still really, really prevalent in our system. So even though the majority of you probably tap your card everywhere you go and don't think about getting out money, cash withdrawals actually still make up a huge proportion of what is being spent in the economy. Where these become particularly interesting are cash withdrawals from border towns, so anywhere that's lying on the border of a country or lying close to a port, lying close to a commercial airport, or anywhere that you can easily get across the border quite quickly, especially within the eastern countries of the Schengen zone, where you're quite literally a frontier border to the rest of the world, so to say. And the rest of it, what you quite often see, and this is really, really common, are essentially one person's account, your private bank account, being used to receive 6, 7, 8 different salaries for 6, 7, 8 different people. The reason for that being that in many cases these people are forced into labour and they will go out and have a job in the world. The NHS has huge problems with this in the UK, so people who are working as nurses, cleaning in the hospital or providing food within the hospital, turning up there with fake ID documents saying that they're a particular person, and that money will go to a different account, and those people are being forced to be there with their family being threatened in the background if they don't go and work. And then the institution behind it is getting 6, 7, 8 different salaries for the work of these people. It's almost impossible to imagine, because probably from anyone from any of our backgrounds would generally think, wait a minute, all I have to do is go to the police. All I have to do is pick up the phone and tell the authorities. But when you come from a background where that threat against your family is that real, that threat against your child, or against your mother, against your brother, your sister, is so real that it's impossible to avoid, you'll carry on doing that, and you will force yourself to do that for what you believe is the right way out in that kind of time. One of the other things as well, I think, which you really cannot underestimate, is sending invoices between companies. For any of you that have your own startup in the room, or anyone who's worked as a freelancer, sending invoices is essential to the way you work. You send an invoice to somebody, you get an invoice every day. Usually you get more than you send out, unfortunately. But the idea is that that invoice for you, presumably, hopefully, relates to real work. It relates to, there's a purpose behind it. Either you've provided a service, or they've provided you a service paying and receiving. Theoretically, great. However, there are millions of shell companies on the planet doing exactly that, moving money between industries across the world, between countries, between entire sort of global systems, where no service has actually ever happened. Where somebody is saying, okay, well, actually, he's just built me a website, he deserves 20,000. This person delivered a shipment of toilet roll. That toilet roll is going to get me through the next year. It's worth 150 grand. And so the thing goes on. And before you know it, you have an entire ring building into hundreds of millions of payments that have never actually had any solid basis in human life, and never actually been used. I'm not going to talk too much about what we do, but I will kind of lead you basically through the process, which is essentially the concept that whatever happens, wherever you're going and wherever you're building it, we basically as a company have a system which comes into your bank, comes into your financial institution, whether it be a loan provider, an FX provider, whether it be typically a challenger bank working to transfer money across multiple countries, and look for exactly those patterns. So while everyone else in the world might think that anti-money laundering compliance is really, really boring, and it is that man walking around Clipboard, and trust me, there is that element to it. And there are way too many people coming at it from that point of view. A huge amount of what we do is look for patterns exactly like this, to find people exactly like this, to find the criminals behind that money, because we don't believe that those people should make money out of that. And luckily we do find it. Luckily we find, I say luckily, I feel in a way that it is lucky that we find it. I, of course, would rather wish that it never happened in the first place, but it is something which is really powerful when you see it happening, and when you see the amount of reports going to the authorities piling up, you realise just how much of it is happening internationally in the first place. Go on to the next one. Bear with me. I'm not going to show an entire video, so that's fine. Yeah. And in order, I'm going to skip through most of this because I don't think it's that relevant to talk about the in-depth of the product. We can describe that to you, any of you who are interested in it afterwards. But we really go into the institution, joined luckily by my team who are sitting in the room, who we haven't got all of them on here, and we are updating the pictures, but who all come from a really similar background and have experience seeing huge companies, or even middle-sized companies, essentially doing things which they shouldn't be doing, supporting people which they shouldn't be supporting, and making billions out of it. Which is why we've basically turned ourselves around and put ourselves on a mission to do business in a way that we believe is good. So that means we're doing business for a good cause, we're creating something for a good cause, but it also means even internally, at least we strive this way and hope to do things this way. We treat the people in the company in a way that they deserve to be treated. I'm hoping that the silence from the team is indicating at least that they agree with that. Yeah, we try and do it in a way that makes companies profitable. The reason for that being that until now everybody has done it in a way that makes companies unprofitable. And how can you expect a multi-billion euro institution with thousands of shareholders who have to have returns and who are expecting a dividend and who are all questioning why their business is not successful, to spend money on compliance, which is really boring and for them has no human connection to it? What we say is completely different, actually. You need to turn that around and allow those people to make money, to be profitable, while being compliant. You have to let them be scalable, because if you don't do that, you will never attack the human problem behind it. You know, human beings are unfortunately selfishly motivated, and if you don't give them the ability to achieve their own self-serving motivations and to help their shareholders, to help them make their profits, then they've got very little reason to ever work with you, apart from perhaps a marketing campaign. Again, I'm not going to go through the ins and outs of these things, but you can take a look at these things afterwards and come and speak with us. Afterwards. What I would say, as I disconnect that, what I would say is don't take it for granted. So don't assume that the things you're seeing are always the things that you're seeing for no reason. I think one of the clearest examples of this, and one of the clearest ways that you come across actions like this, are empty buildings. Empty buildings which are being paid for, which seem to have an operating business model, which are open, and which, for whatever reason, seem to be making money, but you've never seen a single person enter the building. I can think of at least 10 that I walk past regularly, which serve exactly this purpose. But those buildings are usually a centre for exactly this. So that's one of those businesses sending out 20,000 invoices a year, making 45 billion euros a year in potential profit. And actually, there's maybe 2 people sitting in the building printing out invoices every day, and that's all that they do. So I think that, just think about these things a little more when you're getting involved out there. And if any of you come across, if any of you work with anti-money laundering people on a day-to-day basis, then have a word with them, sit down and talk to them. Try to avoid the boring ones with the clipboards, but get involved. And if you have any questions about what we do, how we do it, and why we do it, then come and speak to us afterwards. But I'm going to pass it over to somebody who is far more interesting, far more glamorous, far more qualified to be standing up here, and does so with an accent which is a lot easier to bear than my horrible English one.
Okay, I have no slides, but it's just as well because I'm really bad in my clicker. The difference essentially between people trafficking and people smuggling is people smuggling is a crime against a border, and people trafficking is a crime against a person. Unfortunately, that line becomes blurred very, very quickly because people go willingly. They're told there's jobs in England, jobs in Ireland, jobs in Germany, wherever. And they go with the traffickers and they scrape together as much money as they can find. And then they get there and they're squashed into a truck. Or they're put in an unsafe boat. And they get to the other end and they're told, oh no, you only paid us to get this far. Now you owe us another 5,500. They lock them up and they phone their families. They demand the money. Their families haven't got it. In some cases, they sell the family who want to pay it. But if they haven't got it, these people are now slaves. For all intents and purposes, the smuggled person has become the trafficked person, which is just another word for a slave. And slaves are cheap. At the height of the slave trade, a slave cost the equivalent of $40,000 for one slave. So you took care of them. It wasn't right the way they were treated, but they were given enough to eat. And eventually people saw that this was wrong. Well, they had to be forced to see it, but still wrong. They were released, they were allowed to earn their living. But it's gone back to that, and now a slave costs on average $90. So they're cheap, cheap labour. They're not taken care of, they're sold from one to another. One woman I was speaking to came from Nigeria and she was trafficked to the UK. And she was sold 42 times in 10 years. She went from one brothel to another. She was 15. Her family thought they were paying for her to be brought to the UK to learn a trade and work in a house. But instead, when she got there, she was imprisoned and forced to work in prostitution for 10 years. And she was finally released after 10 years. But the damage is done. That woman will never be the same again. And she'll never forgive her family for that. So she's actively working now to stop this practice. That's only one case. The Mexican cartels, they're putting people across the border. Just last year in San Antonio, Texas, there were 10 people found dead in the rear of a truck. The driver had engaged in people trafficking before. And what they do is they pick the most gormless looking person to drive the truck across the border, because the likelihood is they won't be stopped. If they're sunburnt, all the better, because they think they won't want to be out in the sun too much, letting people into the back of the truck. These are all preconceived notions that mean absolutely nothing. He had no air conditioning on for those people. There were 110 of them squashed into the back of that truck, and they had one air hole between them. He stopped the truck in Walmart's car park in San Antonio, Texas, and let them out. And they were lucky, because a lot of them survived. But there's at least one case a year. There's been cases in Austria. The driver and the truck owner colluded in people trafficking. Those people thought they were being smuggled. They weren't. They were heading for somewhere to work as slaves. Because you can call it what you like. When someone is forced to pay off a debt that they are never going to be able to pay off, they were paying some of these people 50p a day. How are they ever going to pay off 5,500? They're not. But it's really, really difficult to get a conviction because these people are going willingly. They have family at home who the cartels can access, so they will never give evidence against these people unless they know the rest of their family is safe. They're not. So you're never going to stop it. All you can do is try. And you can make it as difficult as possible for these people traffickers because it's a business. It's the second most profitable business in the world after drug trafficking. 150 billion that they can tell went through last year. And you know what? Once you've sold your drugs, they're gone. When you sell a person, you can resell it and resell it and resell it because they don't think of the person as anything other than a nit. It's a commodity. They've lost their humanity. And unfortunately, that's happening more and more and more. And it's not a male-dominated area. In China, most of the traffickers are women. And most of the people they traffic are women and children. They're trafficked for the sex trade. They're also trafficked for organ donation, which you touched upon. And it's booming. And loads of hospitals in the US buy the organs. They say they are from criminals who have been killed, or whatever word you want to use, but basically killed. But they're not. And they have to know because some of the organs are from children, and you don't have child criminals who are executed, but they buy them anyway. So it's a really important area, and I started my business to protect drivers who were being, if somebody's found in the rear of a truck, a driver automatically presumed to be people trafficking, and they receive an automatic fine. And 9 times out of 10, they don't know the person's there, or if they do, they feel sorry for them, or they don't want to be involved. But then I looked into it and I saw the atrocities that are being committed, the inhumanity of man towards man for the sake of money. I had to do something, so we designed our product. We can only stop one small little bit of it. So we developed hardware and software that makes it impossible for the driver or the vehicle owner to collude because it's an auditable electronic log. We would love to have it made like the new tachograph for trucks so that every vehicle would have to have it. So if you crossed the border and you were doing something you shouldn't be doing, or there was somebody in the back of your vehicle, you get caught. So it's not financially viable to do it. So you do something else. You sell more drugs, or you sell more arms. The only thing that will stop it is to make it difficult, expensive, troublesome. And the more people you try to stop the various areas, the more chance you have of stopping it. You'll never stop it completely because families are selling their children. Boyfriends are selling their kids. There was an auction in Gatwick last year of young girls from Eastern Europe. Most of those were brought in on planes by family members or boyfriends. They were brought in legitimately to the UK and they would never return home. The most expensive girl there went for 8,000. By the time she's finished in the sex trade, they sell her for $90, not 90,000. But our device goes in the rear of trucks, and we're doing our own little bit. And truck drivers in the US are also doing their bit. People trafficking doesn't have to be across borders. People are being trafficked within the US. They have pop-up brothels at truck stops. And these young girls are coming up and they're training the drivers to recognise when someone is being trafficked. Because it's so important, and it's something that's swept under the carpet, and it's an uncomfortable truth, and it's something that nobody wants to see. But it's happening, and it'll continue to happen until everybody tries to do their little bit. Nobody can solve the whole thing. But if everybody who has it in them to solve one little issue and make one bit more difficult for people, because these are business people, and at the moment people trafficking is getting closer and closer and closer to the profit margins they're seeing from drugs, and once that happens you can forget it because it'll be too difficult to stop. I've only come across one true case of people smuggling in all of my research, and it was actually shut down last year. It was in Berlin. And it was a migrant woman who had this whole elaborate ring where she was sending Pakistani and Bangladeshi men to the UK to work. was genius the way she set it up. Like if she could put her mind to something constructive, you know. What she had was she had customs agents, travel agents, everybody set up along the line. Everybody was getting their few quid out of it. The family of the people put up the money. Now it was expensive, it was $10,000 to get them to the UK. But they got a visitor's visa to get into Poland. From Poland, because it's part of Schengen, freedom of movement, they went to Germany. In Germany they got new papers. They weren't qualified to do the jobs that they were going to the UK to do. So they got the papers to do those jobs, they got the passports, they moved them to the UK, they'd somebody paid in the UK not to look at the paperwork far too, much, just let them through. And then they got a job. And within 10 years, they had paid the family double what they had invested. But it was very, very professionally run. The money was put into escrow until, like as if you were buying a house, until the people reached the UK and were established safely in the job. So that family knew that person was safe. They may have been working for slightly below the going rate, but they were earning enough to live somewhere decently. They were earning enough to send the money back. The people traffickers were paying their family double their money within 10 years, and they were happy after 10 years they were free and clear. But this is very few and far between. And also, she's in jail now. But every other case I have seen, like there's open slave markets in Syria at the moment, from the people travelling from sub-Saharan Africa to try and get to Europe. The people traffickers have taken the money, alleging they're people smugglers, and then they're auctioning them on slave blocks in Syria. Some of them don't even get out of Africa. They're auctioned there. They are sent to Saudi Arabia. Last year, a lady threw herself off a balcony in Saudi Arabia and broke both her arms. She was an indentured slave. You can call it whatever you like. It was to pay off the debt. They had her passport, they had her paperwork, and they went to the police and family and said, oh, she was trying to run away and she tripped and fell off the balcony. Now, she fell 3 stories, so she should have been dead, but she fell into the pool and just broke both her arms. Nobody was ever prosecuted. These people have no rights. They target the poorest and most disenfranchised in society, and that's why they get away with it. When you say people trafficking, everybody thinks about film Taken. But incidences like that are very, very few and far between because it's too high profile. It's too expensive, it's too troublesome, it's far easier to just buy somebody. And that's it basically. It's important. It's an important thing and everybody should try and do their best. If you can think of anything that can make things difficult for traffickers,